The first bullet shattered the front window of Murphy's Corner Diner before Ethan Cole's mind could catch up to what his eyes were already screaming at him. He'd been watching that black Chevy Suburban crawl past the corner of 47th and King Drive for the third time in 11 minutes, and somewhere deep in his chest, in the part of him that had learned to read danger in Bronzeville sidewalks and empty stairwells, a voice had been whispering, "Wrong, wrong, wrong." Now the whisper was a scream. The glass didn't break the way movies showed it. It disintegrated. 1 second, the front pane of Murphy's bore its peeling gold letters, "Since 1968, best coffee on the South Side," and the next second there was only air and falling light and 1,000 crystalline daggers spinning through the afternoon sun. A shard caught Ethan's cheek just below his left eye. He didn't feel it. He wouldn't feel it for another 20 minutes. The smell hit him before the sound registered fully. Burning meat from the grill where Joe had been flipping a Reuben sandwich mixed with something sharper, chemical, metallic, gunpowder. Ethan had smelled it once before, when he was 9 years old, and a man had died on the sidewalk outside his grandmother's apartment. The brain never forgets that smell. It files it under survive. That, 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 that. The sound came second, and it came wrong, too fast, too many. Not the single bark of a pistol, but something military, something that chewed through wood and vinyl and stucco like it was paper. The booth beside him erupted in yellow foam. The ketchup bottle on his table exploded red across the formica. A freshman girl named Keisha, who always ordered cherry pie on Tuesdays, started screaming in a register Ethan had never heard a human being reach. His eyes found the corner booth. She was there. She was always there. For 3 weeks now, every weekday between 4:30 and 6, the sad girl with the expensive pen and the untouched salad had been sitting at that corner booth, backlit by the big window, bent over calculus problems she didn't need to solve. Ethan didn't know her name. He had spoken exactly one word to her, 7 days ago, when the wind caught her book and he handed it back. "Thanks," she'd whispered in that low, cracked voice, and he'd carried the sound of it home like something stolen. Now the barrel of the rifle was swinging toward her booth, slow, deliberate, finding its range. She didn't see it. Her head was down, her earbuds were in, 14 feet. Ethan's body moved before his brain finished the math. Later, when a surgeon at Northwestern Memorial asked him what he had been thinking, he would tell the truth, which was nothing. There had been no thinking. There had only been the corner booth and the rifle and the girl who hadn't looked up yet, and the 14 feet of greasy checkered linoleum between her and a boy nobody in this city had ever bothered to see. "Get down!" The shout tore out of his throat as he launched himself forward, and even as he did, a small, precise, invisible part of him was cataloging the impossibility of it. Ethan Cole did not shout. Ethan Cole did not run. Ethan Cole did not insert himself into anything, ever. Ethan Cole had spent 2 years and 7 months perfecting the art of being furniture. 14 feet became 11. His duct-taped Converse hit a patch of spilled Sprite and almost went out from under him. He caught himself on the edge of a booth, pushed off, kept moving. A bullet punched through the napkin dispenser 2 inches from his right hand, and he didn't even flinch because flinching was a thing the body did when it had time to be afraid, and his body had no time. 11 feet became 7. She looked up. Her eyes, those strange, sharp green eyes that had haunted 3 weeks of his imagination, met his across the ruined diner, and for a fraction of a second he watched her try to understand what was happening. She didn't. How could she? Girls with leather backpacks and silver pens didn't understand the language of automatic gunfire. Her lips parted. Her hand, the one holding the Mont Blanc, froze above her notebook. 7 feet became 3. Get down, get down, get down. 3 feet became 0. He hit her like a freight train with nothing left to lose. His shoulder caught her ribs just as the wood paneling behind them became splinters and sawdust. They hit the floor together in a tangle of limbs and terror, and for a fraction of a second Ethan thought he had done it, thought they had made it, thought the world owed him exactly one small miracle, and had finally paid up. Then the heat arrived. It bloomed across his back in 2 separate places, almost at the same moment, almost like someone had pressed 2 red-hot coins against his skin and was pushing them slowly through his body. The first, just below his left shoulder blade. The second, lower, near his right hip, a deeper punch that seemed to fold something important in half. For an instant, his entire universe condensed to those 2 points, and every nerve he owned started screaming at once. Then the screaming stopped, and that was worse, because numb was worse than burning. Numb meant something inside him was giving up. Oh my God, no, no, no. Her voice, low, cracked. The same voice that had whispered thanks 7 days ago, now shaking apart above him. He felt her hands on his shoulders, small and frantic, rolling him carefully onto his side. Warmth spread beneath him, a wet blooming heat soaking through his thrift store hoodie, and the detached corner of his brain that refused to shut up identified it. Blood. A lot of blood. His. He opened his eyes. She was hovering over him, and he had never been this close to her face. A cut ran across her left cheekbone from the flying glass, a thin red line he wanted, stupidly, ridiculously, to wipe away. Her dark hair had come loose from its ponytail, and fell around both of them like a curtain. And those eyes, those impossible green eyes that always looked like they were watching the world through one-way glass, those eyes were doing something he had not expected. They were changing. For 3, maybe 4 seconds, they were a teenage girl's eyes, wide and wet and breaking open with the specific horror of watching someone bleed out in her lap. And then, as if a door had closed somewhere behind them, they went flat, cold, calculating. The panic didn't leave her face so much as get put away, filed somewhere inside her where it could be retrieved later, when she had the luxury of feelings. Her hands stopped shaking. She fumbled in her jacket with bloodied fingers and pulled out a phone, an unremarkable black slab that she unlocked without looking. Muscle memory. Her thumb left a red smear across the screen. She pressed one button. Not 911. A single contact. Speed dial. Code black. Her voice had gone level, clipped, surgical. Murphy's, 47th and King Drive. 2 shooters. Black Suburban, eastbound. They breached the screen. A pause. A tiny breath. The boy is dying. Dad, please. Somewhere very far away. Ethan thought. Dying. She said dying. Is that me? Am I the boy? She dropped the phone, pressed both palms hard against the wound under his shoulder blade. He felt her weight come down through her arms and into his back, and it hurt in a distant way, like a toothache in a dream. Stay with me. Her voice cracked back into teenager for one word, then steadied. Stay with me. You don't get to do this. You don't even know my name. You can't die for somebody whose name you don't know. That's ridiculous. That is not how this works. He tried to smile. He couldn't tell if his face obeyed. Outside, sirens began to rise in the distance, but beneath the sirens, closer, deeper, was another sound. Engines. Heavy, coordinated, American V8s eating pavement at speeds the city didn't legally permit. Not police. Something else. Something that moved in formation. Her head turned toward the sound, and for the first time a small, fragile relief broke through the ice in her eyes. They're coming, she whispered down at him. They're almost here. Don't close your eyes. He wanted to tell her he wasn't closing them. His eyelids weren't listening to his wants. The last thing he saw, before the gray that had been tunneling in from the corners of his vision finally swallowed the room, was her face tilted above him like something seen through a cracked mirror, half shadow, half backlight, an angel who had run out of miracles, and was improvising the rest with her bare hands. What Ethan Cole couldn't know, as consciousness slipped out of him and into the pooling red on Joe's linoleum, was that the girl whose ribs he had just cracked with his own shoulder was not named Bella Reyes. Her name was Isabella Voss. She was the only child of Adrian Voss, the man who ran half of this city from the top floor of a glass tower on Michigan Avenue. The name on her transcript, the apartment she pretended to live in, the quiet salad she never ate, all of it was paper, stretched thin over something very old and very dangerous. What he couldn't know was that the debt he had just carved into his own back, in 2 through-and-through punctures that would scar him for the rest of his life, was the kind of debt the Voss family had a saying for. Iron debt, always paid. 3 weeks earlier, on the first Monday of October, Ethan Cole had been perfecting the art of being invisible, and he had not yet learned that invisibility was a wall only thick enough to stop ordinary bullets. It was a survival skill, really. When you were the only scholarship kid at Lincoln Prep High, a polished public school on the north side of Chicago that had been gift-wrapped by 3 tech donors and 2 pharmaceutical heiresses, you learned very quickly that the other students could smell poverty the way dogs smelled fear. His classmates drove the kind of cars their parents had pretended to buy them for their 16th birthdays. Ethan took 2 buses and a 20-minute walk that cut through an alley he did not love. So he had built his rules, and he had followed them the way monks follow prayer. Rule 1. Always take hallway B between 4th and 5th period. Never hallway C. Hallway C belonged to Bryce Hollister and the rest of the junior varsity football line. and Bryce had a particular enthusiasm for slamming lockers shut on the fingers of boys whose sneakers were held together with silver duct tape. Ethan had lost a fingernail in September. He had learned. Rule 2. Eat lunch in the third-floor bathroom, the one by the chemistry wing that nobody used because the radiator hissed. Bring something small, a granola bar from the vending machine, a half sandwich wrapped in a napkin from home. Chew quietly. The trick was to be so unremarkable that if Bryce or his friends pushed open the door, their eyes would slide right over the closed stall and find nothing worth the trouble of kicking. Rule 3. Never raise your hand, even when you know the answer. Especially when you know the answer. Teachers called on the invisible kid when they wanted to embarrass someone, and boys like Bryce punished embarrassment the way other boys collected trading cards. Rule 4. Don't go home until the sun is almost down, because home is where the hard math lived. And the hard math was this. Home was a one-bedroom apartment on the 4th floor of a walk-up in Bronzeville that smelled, in order, like radiator dust, burned coffee, and the menthol rub his grandmother worked into her knuckles when they ached. Margaret Cole, 68 years old, was the only family Ethan had. She slept on the pull-out couch and had given him the bedroom 4 years ago, without ever once framing it as a sacrifice. At night, through the thin wall, he listened to her cough. The cough had been wet for 2 years and was getting wetter. Her heart pills cost $84 a month, and the electric bill was $97, and they had, collectively, $141, which meant someone had to lose this month. And since his grandmother's heart had gone to work in Ethan's father's war a long time before Ethan was born, he had a strong opinion about who was allowed to lose, so he stayed out. Home after dark meant home with the bulbs already burning, and Nana Maggie wouldn't know he had been sitting somewhere else doing her favor for her. That somewhere was Murphy's Corner Diner, on 47th and King Drive, a greasy wedge of a place that had been pouring coffee since before his grandmother was born. Joe behind the counter pretended not to notice when Ethan filled his plastic water cup with the fountain Sprite. The corner booth by the emergency exit had a vinyl seat split down the middle and a patch of duct tape across the tear that matched the duct tape on Ethan's sneakers. And he had decided, privately, that this was fate. The small order of fries cost $2.47. With tax, $2.61. With the quarter he always left on the table for Joe, $2.86. He kept $3.12 folded in the zip pocket of a $4 Goodwill jacket that had, according to the thrift tag, once belonged to somebody named Raymond. This was his kingdom. A cracked booth, a paper envelope of fries, a grandmother waiting up the stairs, and a set of rules that kept him as small could go. And then she walked in. And for the first time in 2 years, Ethan Cole forgot how to be invisible. She transferred into Lincoln Prep on a Tuesday, the first week of October, in the middle of 3rd period, and by the end of that school day every junior who owned a phone had learned her name, Bella Reyes. She sat in the back of AP Calculus with her hands folded on top of a binder that looked newer than every binder in the room combined, and she answered Mrs. Chen's opening question about implicit differentiation without lifting her eyes from the desk. The answer was correct. The silence that followed was not. Ethan watched her from 3 rows up and 1 column over, and he understood immediately that she was wrong for this school, the way a hawk is wrong in a pet store. Not better, not worse, wrong. Her hair was a dark brown, so deep it read black in the fluorescence, cut in a precise line that stopped exactly at her shoulder blades. She wore the Lincoln Prep uniform, white blouse and navy skirt, the way the brochure photographed it, and the way no actual student ever did, every seam sitting where the tailor had promised it would sit. Her backpack was soft leather, the color of black coffee, with no brand visible, which is how you knew the brand was expensive. Her eyes were green, not the warm, interesting green of a magazine advertisement. A sharp, cold, watchful green, the green of sea glass that had been tumbled for a long time and had stopped softening. They did not linger on anyone. They catalogued and moved on. She was, Ethan decided with a small internal thud, the loneliest person he had ever seen. The next afternoon she walked into Murphy's Corner Diner at 4:37, and Joe behind the counter blinked at her the way a man blinks at a lost racehorse wandering into his backyard. She ordered a Cobb salad, no dressing, water. She chose the booth diagonally across from Ethan's, the one by the big front window, and set her leather bag on the vinyl seat beside her like it was a pet she didn't want to get dirty. She opened her binder. She uncapped a silver pen, heavy, lacquered black at the ends, with a small white 6-pointed star on the clip, the kind of pen Ethan had only ever seen in a locked glass case at Water Tower Place. She did not touch the salad. She came back on Wednesday, and Thursday, and Friday, and every weekday for the 2 weeks that followed. Same booth, same salad, same untouched water, same beautiful, absurd silver pen, moving across the same calculus problems she clearly did not need to solve, because Ethan, who was a quiet second in AP Calc, had seen her finish Friday's problem set in 11 minutes without erasing anything. He told himself he would not stare. He failed every day. Invisibility, his great and only skill, refused to function in her direction. They did not speak. Not once. For 3 weeks, the corner booth and the window booth existed on 2 separate continents, separated by 31 feet of checkered linoleum and the low hum of Joe's espresso machine. She did not look at him. He looked at her the way a moth watches a porch light and tries to pretend it has other plans. Then, on a Thursday near the end of those 3 weeks, the door of the diner banged open behind a late customer and a gust of October wind ran straight across the room. It caught the pages of her textbook and flipped them shut with a soft, final sound. Her hardcover bookmark, a slim piece of something that looked like real leather, skittered across the floor and came to rest 2 feet from Ethan's sneakers. He picked it up. He crossed the 31 feet. He set it on her table. She looked up. Her eyes met his for the first time, and Ethan had a sudden, disorienting sensation of being seen by something that did not usually see the likes of him, the way a deer on a highway sees headlights. "Thanks," she said. Her voice was lower than he had imagined, a quiet alto, slightly rough around the edges, like a voice that had spent some portion of the last year crying in private and refusing to show it in public. He nodded. He retreated. When she left the diner that evening, Ethan glanced out the window without meaning to, and saw something he immediately told himself he had not seen. A black SUV parked across the street, windows tinted. 2 men in dark jackets inside. The engine had been off. The moment Bella Reyes stepped onto the sidewalk, it turned on. He told himself he was imagining things. Bronzeville had black SUVs. Bronzeville had men in dark jackets. It meant nothing. She didn't know he existed. And that, though neither of them understood it yet, was the only thing keeping both of them alive, until it wasn't. 3 weeks after the fallen bookmark, on the last Monday of October, the story folded back on itself. The first time Ethan saw the Tahoe, it was 4:41 in the afternoon, and he only saw it because he had lifted his eyes from his chemistry notes to check whether she had walked in yet. She had. She was in her booth. The salad was already on the table. The silver pen was already moving. The Tahoe was gray, not black. A newer body style, 19 or 20, tinted windows so dark the glass looked painted. It rolled past the front of Murphy's at a speed that was not quite right for the block. Slow enough to look, fast enough not to park. The rear plate was smeared with something, mud or grease, and Ethan could not read the numbers. He told himself, the way he had told himself about the black SUV 3 weeks ago, that it meant nothing. The second time it passed was 4:53. Same speed, same direction. This time the driver turned his head as the Tahoe drew even with the window, and Ethan caught the silhouette of a baseball cap pulled low and sunglasses, even though the sun was already tipping behind the rooftops. His stomach did something small and cold. Across the diner, the sad girl with the expensive pen turned a page. 5:02. The Tahoe came back. This time it did not roll past. It stopped. It stopped directly in front of the big window, the one where she sat, backlit against the last of the October light, a perfect silhouette for anyone who wanted one. The passenger side window began to descend with a small mechanical whine that somehow, impossibly, Ethan heard over the sizzle of the grill and the laughter of the freshmen 2 booths away. A black barrel emerged. Not a pistol. Something longer. Something wrong. The barrel rose, leveled, aimed, with the patient ugliness of a tool that had been designed for exactly this. Ethan's body moved before his voice did. He was already off the bench, already shouting, and the shout and the first bullet arrived in the same instant. Get down 14 feet. He had counted those feet 100 times in his imagination without knowing he was counting. The distance from his booth to hers was 14 feet of cracked linoleum, and he crossed it in something that afterwards felt less like running and more like falling forward into a hole that had opened under him. 11, 7, 3. Her head came up. Her green eyes found his, confused for the last clean second of both of their lives. And then he hit her ribs, his shoulder. The wall behind them, where half a calendar of Bears memorabilia and a framed photograph of Joe's wife had been hanging that morning, became splinters and sawdust, and a smoke of plaster dust that tasted like the end of a world. 30 rounds, maybe more, chewed across the booth at chest height. Two of them found Ethan on the way down, one through the meat above his left shoulder blade, one through his right hip, both passing clean through and into the floor. The pain was not immediate. The pain was patient. It was waiting for the adrenaline to go first. He rolled. He kept her under him. The gunfire stopped. Tires screamed. The Tahoe peeled east down 47th, and somewhere across the diner, Joe was shouting in a language that might have been English and might have been pure noise, and a young woman was crying in sharp, tearing breaths, and Ethan's cheek was pressed to cold floor that was rapidly getting warm. 90 seconds. That was how long it took. He heard them before he saw them. A low, coordinated roar. 5 engines moving as one formation, coming up 47th from the west. 5 black Chevy Suburbans pulled into a loose arc across the front of Murphy's, close enough that the last of the daylight flashed off their grills. Doors opened in something very close to unison. The first man out was enormous, 6'4", maybe more, shoulders that seemed to have been installed rather than grown, dark suit, dark coat, an earpiece with a clear coiled cord. His hair was cropped close. His eyes were the gray of something that had been frozen a long time and was no longer trying to thaw. He crossed the ruined floor in 4 long strides and dropped to one knee beside them. Princess. His voice was low, Irish somewhere deep under the Chicago. Are you hit? Not me, Isabella said, and her voice was already the flat adult voice from the phone call. Him. Saint. Please. Declan O'Brien, whom the Voss Syndicate had called Saint for 11 years because he was the last man between their only daughter and the grave, did not answer. He rolled Ethan carefully onto his side, opened a small black pouch from inside his coat, and began packing the wounds with the practiced economy of a man who had done this in Fallujah and Mosul and once, memorably, in a parking garage in Detroit. Stay with me, kid, Saint murmured. Your ride's almost here. The sirens were rising at last. Isabella's bloodied hand found Ethan's and held it, small and fierce, as the ambulance rounded the corner. You are not dying, she said, close to his ear. I'm not allowing it. At Northwestern Memorial, 12 miles north, Adrian Voss was already waiting. Ethan woke up slowly, the way a diver rises from deep water, and the first thing he noticed was that the beeping was quieter than it had any right to be. The second thing he noticed was the ceiling. It was not the stained foam panel ceiling of a public emergency room. It was a smooth expanse of hand-troweled plaster, warmly lit by recessed fixtures that glowed the soft amber of something chosen by somebody who cared about the difference between fluorescent and flattering. To his left, a wall of glass looked out across the Chicago River and the gold and navy smear of Michigan Avenue at dusk. To his right, a television was muted on a financial channel, a large flat screen in a wooden frame that matched the cabinetry. The cabinetry matched. Nothing in any hospital Ethan had ever seen had matching anything. He turned his head half an inch and immediately regretted it. The pain in his back and hip arrived all at once, dulled but real, the kind of pain that had been negotiated down by expensive medication and was patiently waiting its turn to speak up. A clear IV line snaked into the back of his left hand. Someone had changed him into a gown that was softer than his own sheets at home. 2 men in black suits stood by the door, not nurses. They did not glance at him when he stirred. They were watching the hallway. A third man sat in an armchair beside the bed, and Ethan understood, without being told, that this man owned the room. He was perhaps 37, maybe a little more. Dark hair cut close at the sides, touched with silver at the temples in a way that read as earned rather than cultivated. A jaw that had been broken once and rebuilt by someone very skilled. A fine white scar along the left cheekbone, thin as a pencil line, nearly invisible unless the light caught it. His suit was black, single-breasted, the kind of tailoring that did not announce itself because it did not have to. His tie was a dull charcoal. On his left hand he wore a single wedding band, plain, worn, smooth. He held a glass of water the way other men held weapons. His eyes were the same sharp green Ethan had last seen above him on a bloody diner floor. Mr. Cole. The man's voice was quiet, low, a voice that had clearly never once in its life needed to be raised to be obeyed. You're at Northwestern Memorial. Top floor. My floor. You've been here for 19 hours. The surgeons say you will keep the use of both arms and your spine. I asked them 3 times. They answered 3 times. Ethan tried to speak. His throat was sandpaper. The man set down the glass of water, picked up a smaller one with a bent straw, and held it to his lips with a precision that was almost gentle. Ethan drank. The water tasted like nothing had ever tasted. Thank you, he rasped. You saved my daughter. The man did not introduce himself. He did not need to. I do not forget that. Each word landed like a stone dropped into still water. The voice was not a threat. The voice was something far more careful than a threat, and that was what put a cold shiver between Ethan's shoulder blades. Adrian Voss watched him absorb it and went on. Your hospital bill is resolved. Private room, private surgeon, private aftercare for as long as you require it. Your grandmother, Margaret Cole, is at your apartment. A registered nurse is with her, a woman named Dolores, who will remain for the next 2 weeks. Her heart medication has been renewed and delivered. Your rent on the unit on South Calumet is paid through the end of March. The electric, the gas, the water, handled. Ethan's eyes burned. He tried to sit up, and the pain in his hip told him, in a polite institutional tone, that he would not be sitting up today. Sir, I can't. You can. The word was not loud. It did not need to be. And you will. This is not charity, Mr. Cole. I do not give charity. What you are receiving is the partial interest on a debt that my family owes you. And my family, for better and for worse, pays what it owes. That is not a virtue. That is arithmetic. He rose. He was not an especially tall man, perhaps a shade under 6 feet, but the room adjusted itself around him, as though the ceiling had quietly lifted to make space. At the door, he paused. He turned his head just enough to look back over his shoulder. My daughter will want to see you. She will come. You will treat her with respect, and you will keep a proper distance. She is not a girl you get to know, Mr. Cole. Am I understood? Ethan nodded. It was the only answer the room permitted. Adrian Voss left, and the 2 men at the door followed him out, and the door clicked shut behind all 3 of them as softly as the lid of a very expensive box. Ethan had just signed a contract written not in ink, but in blood. He only did not know it yet. She came on the 3rd day. Ethan had been drifting in and out of morphine dreams when the door opened, and he half expected another nurse, or perhaps Saint, who had already come twice to sit silent at the foot of the bed with his gray eyes tracking the hallway outside. Instead, a small figure slipped through the door alone, closed it behind her with her back, and stood very still, as if she were waiting for him to tell her to leave. For a long second, he did not recognize her. She was wearing an oversized gray hoodie that did not belong to her, the cuffs swallowing her hands entirely, the hem reaching halfway down her thighs over black leggings. Her hair was pulled into a loose knot at the back of her skull, unbrushed. Her face was clean of the careful, neutral makeup she had worn to school, and because of that he could see for the first time how young she actually was, and how tired. The skin under her eyes was the color of a bruise almost finished healing. There was still a thin pink line across her left cheekbone, a souvenir from the diner window that would fade but not disappear. The silver pen was nowhere. She was not, today, the girl from the corner booth. She crossed the room slowly, pulled the armchair her father had used 3 days ago a little closer to the bed, and sat down. She folded her sleeve-wrapped hands in her lap. She did not speak. Ethan counted 5 full minutes on the clock above the television before she did. They told me I shouldn't come, she said finally. Her voice was the same low alto from the diner, from the phone call, from everything. I came anyway. Who said? My father, Saint, our head of security, our lawyer, a tiny, private, almost unseen curl of her mouth. My therapist, who I haven't seen in 4 months. Why did you come? Her green eyes flicked up to his, then away, then back, and this time they stayed. Because you're lying here with 2 holes in you because of me, and the least I owe you is a name. She took a breath. My name is Isabella Voss, not Bella Reyes. Bella Reyes is paperwork. Bella Reyes is a transcript my father's people built for me 6 months ago, after a man with a very quiet gun walked into a restaurant in Manhattan while I was eating dinner with 2 of our cousins. He did not shoot me. He was shot first, but he had been sent. He was the first. Her voice did not shake. It had stopped being allowed to, a long time ago. Murphy's was the second. Whoever sent them has been patient, and very good, and until this week, I thought I was actually hidden. Why Murphy's? He asked. Because it was the one question that had been circling inside his head, like a trapped bird since he had opened his eyes. She was quiet for a while. Because nobody looked at me there, she said. Everyone at Lincoln Prep looks. The girls are measuring me. The boys are trying not to be caught measuring me. The teachers know who my father is, even if they pretend otherwise. At Murphy's, I was a girl with a salad. Joe didn't care. The old men at the counter didn't care. Another pause. Except you. He did not know what to say to that, so he said nothing. You looked at me like I was a person, not a princess, not a target, a person who was sad. I hadn't been that in a long time. She reached out then, hesitant, and laid her hand lightly over his. Her fingers were cold. The IV stung a little where her knuckles brushed it. For a moment he thought she was going to say something else, and the room felt unbearably fragile, as though anything at all might break it. She pulled her hand back. I shouldn't be friends with you, Ethan Cole. My father is right. Being close to me is the most dangerous thing a person in this city can be. She stared down at her own lap. I'm going to be selfish anyway. For a little while. My aunt is flying in tomorrow. Aunt Victoria. She's going to stay with me while my father sorts this out. She'll keep me steady. A small, almost apologetic smile. I just wanted you to know that I know, that you did what you did. That I won't forget. She stood up. At the door, she turned. The next time a bullet comes looking for me, Ethan Cole, I don't want it to find you again. They discharged him on the 9th morning, under a cold, colorless sky that smelled like the first threat of snow. Saint was waiting by the curb beside a Mercedes S-Class, the color of wet slate, parked in a loading zone where 3 signs said it should not be parked, and no one on the entire block had asked him to move. He opened the rear passenger door without a word. Ethan lowered himself onto leather that was warmer than his bed at home, and understood, only after the door had closed behind him with a soft, pressurized thunk, that the windows were thicker than windows had any right to be. It's armored, Saint said quietly from the driver's seat, answering the question Ethan had not asked. Don't worry about it. Just means you're harder to kill in here than out there. The drive south on Lakeshore Drive took 22 minutes. Saint did not fill them with conversation. He drove the way he did everything else, with an economy that suggested he was not wasting a single motion he might need later. At a red light, his eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, and Ethan realized they had not left the mirror since Streeterville. When they pulled up outside his building on South Calumet, Ethan did not recognize it at first. The front door, which had hung slightly off its hinges for 4 years, was plumb and freshly painted. The intercom panel, which had not worked in Ethan's memory, glowed a patient blue. In the hallway, the dead bulb on the 3rd landing had been replaced, and somebody had scrubbed the stairwell. The whole building smelled, faintly, of lemon and fresh cock. Saint carried Ethan's small bag up all 4 flights. At the apartment door, he set it down, nodded once, and left without going inside. The apartment was warm. That was the first thing Ethan noticed. It had been cold in October. Cold in a way that meant you wore a hat indoors, and now a new radiator hummed against the wall where the old one had rattled. The kitchen refrigerator was not his refrigerator. It was white and quiet, and when he opened it out of disbelief, it was full. Fruit and bread and a gallon of whole milk, and the exact brand of yogurt his grandmother liked but had stopped buying 2 winters ago. His grandmother was sitting in her armchair by the window. Nana Maggie was 68 years old, and tonight she looked 80. Her hair, the soft cotton white of it, was combed and pinned the way she always pinned it. Her lap held a folded dish towel. She was crying without sound, the way she had cried at his mother's funeral when he was 7, with her chin up and her eyes fixed on the middle distance, as though tears were a small private weather she would not dignify. Nana, he said. She opened her arms. He crossed the room and went into them carefully because of his back, and she held him without squeezing, and for a long time neither of them spoke. When she finally pulled back, she cupped his jaw in one cool, dry hand and looked at him the way he had never, in 16 years, been looked at by her before. She looked at him like she was afraid of him. Baby, she whispered. What was that man's name? The one who paid for all this? What did he tell you his name was? Adrian Voss. The blood left her face so quickly he thought for a second she was going to faint. Her hand dropped from his jaw. She rose from the armchair unsteadily, as though the floor had shifted under her, and walked past him into the bedroom. He followed. She was kneeling in front of the closet. She had pulled out the old sewing basket from the bottom, the one that had been there since he was a boy, and was digging beneath the bolts of thread and the packets of needles, until her fingers found an envelope tucked flat against the basket's false bottom. It was yellowed at the edges. The glue had gone brittle. She sat on the edge of the bed and opened it with hands that had stopped trembling because they had moved past trembling into something worse. Inside were 3 things. A passport in his name, Ethan Samuel Walsh, issued 4 years ago, never used. An address on an index card, a post office box in a town called Libby, Montana, written in her careful cursive, and a small, faded color photograph of 2 men standing in front of a brick wall somewhere sunny. One of them was younger than Adrian. Voss had been in the hospital, early 30s maybe, but already with the same dark hair and careful eyes. The other man was thinner, softer, with Ethan's jaw and Ethan's hairline and a quiet tiredness that Ethan knew from every mirror he had ever owned. "That's your father," Nana Maggie said. "That's Samuel. The other man is Adrian Voss, 10 years before you were born." Her voice dropped to a whisper that did not belong to the grandmother he had grown up with. "We have to leave, baby. Tonight. I have hidden you for too long already." "Hidden from what?" "Nana, Dad died when I was 3. Your father didn't die, Ethan." Her eyes were bright and terrible. "Your father vanished. And there are people in this country who will kill us both the second they learn you are still breathing. But it was already too late. They already knew." 12 miles north of Nana Maggie's kitchen, at the exact moment her fingers closed around the faded photograph of Samuel Cole, a black Escalade was turning off Lakeshore Drive and rolling up the cobblestone drive of a 5-story limestone townhouse on Astor Street in the Gold Coast. The Voss residence did not announce itself. From the sidewalk, it looked like any of the other old money mansions on the block, an elegant face of pale stone, wrought iron balconies, tall windows with heavy drapes drawn close. What the sidewalk did not see was that every one of those windows was rated to stop a rifle round at 100 meters, that the oak front door had a steel core thicker than a bank vault's, and that 12 men rotated through the property on 3 shifts, every single one of them handpicked by Declan O'Brien. The woman who stepped down from the Escalade walked toward that door as though she had built it. Victoria Hale was 40 years old, and she wore the 40 years the way a piece of tailored couture wore a model. Her hair was platinum blonde, cut to her jaw in a polished blunt line that had required 2 hours with a colorist in New York that morning. Her coat was a cashmere Chanel, the color of midnight. Her heels were quiet on the stone steps. She carried one small overnight bag in her left hand and a bouquet of white roses in the crook of her right arm, and she was smiling the particular cool, fond smile of a woman arriving to comfort a niece she adored. Adrian Voss met her in the foyer. "Victoria, Adrian." She set down the bag, set down the roses on the console table, and took both his hands in hers. Her grip was warm, her eyes were warm, and only someone who had been trained to look for it would have noticed that her pupils never quite settled on his. "I came as soon as you called. How is she? Alive?" His voice was the voice he used for family, the one almost nobody in Chicago had ever heard. "She has not slept. Take me to her." Upstairs, on the 4th floor, Isabella was curled in the window seat of her bedroom with a book she was not reading open in her lap, watching the bare branches of the oak tree outside fidget in the wind. When the door opened and she saw who was standing there, her face did something she had not let it do in a week. It broke. "Aunt Vicky. Oh, my darling. Oh, my sweet girl. Come here." Victoria crossed the room in 3 soft steps and folded Isabella into her arms. She smelled, as she had smelled for as long as Isabella could remember, of roses and cedar, a scent that Isabella's mother, Elena, had worn first. Victoria was her mother's younger sister, the last piece of Elena left in the world, and when Isabella was 8 years old, and her mother had gone to the cemetery under a stone that said she had died in a car accident on the Kennedy Expressway, Aunt Vicky had flown in from Boston and held her every night for a month until she could sleep alone again. So Isabella pressed her forehead against her aunt's shoulder now, and cried the way she had not been able to cry in front of Saint or her father, or the boy with 2 holes in his back. Victoria stroked her hair. She murmured quiet nothings in Italian, the way Elena had when Isabella was small. She let her weep herself down to silence. Then she sat on the edge of the bed and took up the silver-backed brush from the vanity and began, with slow, tender strokes, to work the tangles out of her niece's hair. "You've been thinking about that boy," Victoria said softly, after a little while. "The one from the diner." "Yes," Isabella whispered. "I thought so, Kara. A girl does not stop thinking about someone who bleeds for her. That's a very old kind of magic." The brush moved steadily. "But you have to be careful now. You understand that, don't you? Women like us, in families like ours, we aren't allowed to love anyone too much. It's not a rule someone made up to be cruel. It's a rule the world writes on us in ink we cannot wash off. Your mother learned that lesson. She learned it in blood." Isabella said nothing. The brush moved and moved and moved. 2 hours later, after Isabella had at last fallen asleep with her aunt's cardigan laid over her shoulders, Victoria walked down the marble staircase to the first-floor sitting room with the unhurried grace of a woman at home in someone else's house. She closed the sitting room's heavy doors behind her. She crossed to the far window, where no one in the hallway would hear, and took out a small black phone that did not look like the phone she used with Adrian. When the line connected, her voice had changed entirely. Warmth gone, the Italian gone. What remained was flat, clipped, efficient, the voice of a professional reporting to a superior. "I'm in," she said. "The girl is shaken. She trusts me. Give me a few more days and I'll have her pulling away from the coal boy on her own." The voice on the other end was older, dry, patient. "Good. Do not rush it, Victoria. I want her to push him out of her own life. That will hurt Adrian more than anything we could do from outside." "Understood, Leonard." She ended the call. She slipped the phone back into the hidden pocket of her coat. She walked calmly to the console table where she had left the white roses, selected the most perfect one, clipped its thorns with a small pair of shears, and carried it upstairs to lay beside her sleeping niece's hand. In the world Adrian Voss had built, monsters did not always come with teeth. Sometimes they came with white roses and a kiss on the forehead. 2 weeks after the white rose was laid beside Isabella's sleeping hand, Ethan Cole walked back through the front doors of Lincoln Prep High under a sky the color of brushed pewter, and the building he had spent 2 years trying to disappear inside of refused to let him. He had argued with Nana Maggie about coming back at all. She had wanted Montana. She had wanted the passport, the bus station, the night train, any road that did not lead back through a hallway where something might find him. Adrian Voss had overruled her gently. Running, Adrian had said, standing in their living room in a coat that cost more than their building, was what you did when no one was watching the door. He was watching the door now. There would be no running. So Saint picked Ethan up on a Monday morning at 7:42, driving the same slate-gray S-Class that had carried him home from the hospital. The car pulled into the faculty circle at the front of the school, past the student drop-off line, past the freshmen in their $1,000 parkas, and stopped exactly where no student vehicle was supposed to stop. Saint got out first. He opened the rear passenger door. Ethan climbed out slowly, favoring his hip, wearing a new wool coat that Nana Maggie had folded across his shoulders like a blanket and kissed him on the forehead under. The front steps of Lincoln Prep held perhaps 90 students. All 90 of them stopped moving. Ethan felt every pair of eyes settle on him at the same instant, a physical pressure between his shoulder blades, and for one bright panicked second, his old instincts fired hot and useless. Shrink, vanish, step left into the crowd, become furniture. None of it was available to him anymore. Saint, 6'4" and quietly exuding the specific presence of a man who had once cleared rooms in Mosul for a living, stood at his left shoulder like a stone wall that had chosen today to be polite. "Go on, kid," Saint said, very low. "I'll be in this spot at 3:15. Ethan walked up the steps. The crowd opened for him the way water opens for a ship. At the top of the steps, near the double doors, stood Bryce Hollister and 2 of his linemen. Bryce was 6 feet of stocky Wisconsin muscle, with a jaw that usually arrived in a room before the rest of him. This morning, his jaw was hanging slightly open, and his eyes had gone, the particular ashen gray that a certain kind of boy went, when a certain kind of adult he had not expected to see looked at him for half a second too long. Saint had not even turned his head. Saint did not need to. Bryce stepped back. Bryce said nothing. Bryce, as Ethan passed within arm's length of him for the first time in 2 years, looked down at his own shoes. Hallway C, once the spine of Ethan's daily fear, lay open before him like a river that had finally dropped its current. People moved out of his path. A freshman girl he did not know whispered something to her friend that he did not catch. A junior named Tyler, who had poured chocolate milk into his backpack last spring, actually nodded at him. Nodded. 3rd period. AP Calculus. Mrs. Chen was writing on the board. Ethan slid into his seat in the back, the 2nd row, middle column, and opened his notebook. 2 minutes before the bell, the classroom door clicked shut, and quiet footsteps crossed the industrial carpet, and Isabella Voss pulled out the empty chair directly beside him and sat down in full view of every other student in the room. 30 heads turned. 30 heads, very quickly, turned back to the board. "We're not hiding anymore," she said softly, so only he could hear. "Is that all right with you?" He looked at her. The pink line across her cheekbone was almost gone. Her silver pen was back in her hand. "Yes," he said. At lunch, she led him to a small round table by the tall windows on the south side of the cafeteria, a table nobody sat at because it was too exposed. They sat across from each other and unwrapped their sandwiches and did not speak for a little while because they did not need to. Halfway through the period, a shadow fell over the table. Bryce Hollister was standing there, alone, his shoulders folded in, his eyes fixed on a point 2 inches to the left of Ethan's. "Cole," Bryce said. His voice was not steady. I want to say, I was an asshole, about the lockers, and the other stuff. I was an asshole, man. Ethan let him stand there for 3 full seconds. I accept that, he said. His own voice surprised him, calm and flat and adult. On one condition. Next time you see someone getting pushed around in a hallway, you stop it. You don't join in. You stop it. Deal? Deal. Yeah, deal. Okay. Bryce walked away. Isabella, across the table, was looking at Ethan with a very small, very new expression. You've changed, she said. No, he said, and realized as he said it that it was true. I just stopped lying about who I was. That afternoon, in the back of Saint's car, watching the long slate-gray city slide past his window, Ethan understood something that shifted in his chest like a stone settling in a riverbed. Being invisible had kept him alive. Being visible, right here, beside this girl, was the first thing that had ever made him feel alive. He had no way of knowing that he had exactly 2 weeks of it left before Leonard Graves decided to move. On the same evening, Ethan Cole unwrapped his first lunch beside Isabella Voss in a sunlit cafeteria, 2 floors below the street level of the Astor townhouse, in a room that did not appear on any blueprint the city of Chicago had on file. Adrian Voss was learning the name he should have learned years ago. The file room had no windows. It had concrete walls, a reinforced steel door with a biometric lock, 3 servers that hummed in a low and companionable minor chord, and a single oak desk under a green-shaded banker's lamp. It was the only room in the house where Adrian allowed himself to read things the world was not supposed to know. Tonight, the desk held 4 manila folders, a photograph sealed in a glassine sleeve, and a short-cut glass tumbler of bourbon that had not yet been touched. Across the desk from him sat Marcus Reed, whom the syndicate had called Ghost for a decade and a half, because he had a way of producing information that nobody had any business possessing. Ghost was narrow, precise, 46, with a receding hairline he did not bother to hide and wire-frame glasses that reflected the lamp in small green rectangles. Start with the easy part, Adrian said. Ghost opened the first folder. Samuel Andrew Cole, born Milwaukee, 1972, CPA, certified fraud examiner. He worked at a mid-tier accounting firm in New York between 1998 and 2004. After that, the paper trail goes quiet for 5 years. Then, spring of 2009, he is reported missing by his mother, Margaret Cole, who at the time was raising his son, Ethan Samuel, age 3. Samuel's wife, Rachel, had died the previous autumn. Cause of death on the certificate: heart failure. Heart failure at what age? 31. Adrian said nothing. He turned the photograph in its glassine sleeve so the lamp caught it. 2 men in front of a sun-warmed brick wall somewhere that was not Chicago. One of them, younger, dark-haired, stood with the particular contained stillness Adrian had only ever seen in his own mirror. The other man was thinner, softer, with a long, quiet jaw that Adrian had now seen twice this month, once on a hospital bed, and once on his own daughter's phone screen. Samuel was declared legally dead by a court in New York State in 2016. The syndicate file from that year lists him as, quote, a known defector from the consortium, liquidated following the exposure of his breach. Ghost's voice flattened. Here is the part I cannot make add up. There is no body. There is no grave. There is no consortium member, past or present, who will claim credit for the kill. I have made careful inquiries. I have offered money. Samuel Cole disappeared in the spring of 2009, and nobody who should have killed him will admit to having done it. Meaning there is a very reasonable chance he was never killed. Meaning there is a very reasonable chance that a man who held the deepest ledgers of the most powerful underground financial network in North America has been alive and breathing somewhere on this continent for the last 17 years, and has, until now, been too careful to be found. Adrian picked up the photograph. His breath did something small and precise inside his chest. I know him. Ghost looked up. Sir, New York, 2008. A dinner at the Carlyle I was not supposed to be at. With 2 men I was not supposed to meet. He was 3 chairs down. He was introduced to me as Sam. He barely spoke. He had the quietest hands I have ever seen on a man in that room, and every number that came up that night, he corrected without opening a book. Adrian set the photograph down very carefully, as if it might crack. They called him Sam the Ledger. I was told later that he kept the entire shadow accounting of the consortium in his head and 1 encrypted drive. I was told, still later, that he had stolen the drive and been put in the ground for it. But he wasn't. No, Adrian said. Apparently not. Silence moved through the small concrete room. Sir, Ghost said carefully, if Samuel Cole is alive, And if his son knows any fraction of what his father knew, or could lead someone to what his father took, then the boy lying in a hospital bed 2 weeks ago is the single most valuable human being walking free in North America right now. Every principal member of the consortium, or any remnant of it that still exists, will come for him. And they will come for anyone standing close to him. Adrian stood. He walked to the wall where no window should have been, and pressed his palm flat against the cold paint, as if he could feel Chicago on the other side of it. In his mind's eye, the city he had bled for was laid out beneath him, gold and navy, a board he had spent 20 years learning the exact weight of every piece on. "Does Isabella know any of this?" Ghost asked. "No. Will you tell her?" "Not yet." Adrian turned back. His green eyes were very quiet. "I want to know who is hunting the boy before I hand my daughter one more thing to be afraid of." Ghost nodded once, and began to gather the folders. Upstairs, on the 4th floor, Aunt Vicky was kissing Isabella goodnight on the forehead and smelling very faintly of Chanel. The hunter Adrian Voss was looking for was already inside his house. Victoria Hale did not poison her niece with a single dose. She poisoned her the way she did everything else, in careful, patient increments, never more than the girl could swallow in one sitting. The first few days, she simply made the Voss house feel like a home again. She cooked. She filled the big, quiet kitchen with the smell of garlic and butter, and her sister Elena's bolognese sauce, the one recipe every Hale woman learned before she was allowed to wear lipstick. She pulled Isabella's old knitting basket out from the back of a closet, and sat with her in the library and taught her the stitches all over again, because Isabella had forgotten them the winter her mother died. She told stories. Elena at 19, dancing barefoot at a wedding in Naples. Elena at 22, laughing so hard she spilled wine on a senator's wife. Elena as she had been before she became an idea, before she became a grave on a hill in Oak Woods. Isabella drank every story like water, and with every story, Victoria added one small drop of something else. On the 4th evening, she said, brushing out Isabella's hair again, as though the brushing were a ritual they had always shared, "Your father hasn't slept, Kara. I heard him on the phone last night at 3 a.m. Did you know that?" Isabella's eyes met her, ants in the vanity mirror. "He's worried," Victoria went on softly. "Not about the shooters. Men of our family have always handled shooters. He's worried about the Cole boy. Every day that boy walks next to you, we become more visible to the people who sent that car. Surely you see that. Ethan didn't ask for any of this. No, darling, he didn't. That's why it's so sad." On the 6th evening, she said, "Love is a weapon in our world, Isabella. It doesn't matter how pure it is, or how accidental. The moment our enemies learn the name of the person you cannot bear to lose, they have a dagger pointed at the soft part of you. Your mother knew that. Your grandmother knew that. It's not a rule we invented. It's a rule the world wrote on us in ink we cannot wash off." On the 9th evening, over 2 cups of untouched chamomile tea in the low light of the sitting room, she said the thing she had been saving. "Did your mother ever tell you, darling, about the boy she loved before she met your father?" Isabella froze. No, she wouldn't have. She was too kind. Victoria's eyes filled, convincingly, with water. He was sweet. An ordinary boy. A medical student. Your mother was 19. She wrote his name inside the cover of a novel she kept by her bed for the rest of her life, and I think I was the only person who ever knew. A long, exquisitely timed pause. Your grandfather found out. And that boy, Kara, the sweet medical student, he went walking home one evening in Milan and he never arrived. There was no body. There was no funeral. Your mother never spoke his name aloud again. That was what loving a man outside our world cost her. And she was luckier than most, because she lived. None of it was true. Isabella's mother had met her father at 21 and loved no one else before him. Victoria knew this because Victoria had been there. She had held Elena's wedding veil, but Isabella had no way to check. Elena had been dead for 8 years, and there was something about hearing the story spoken in this room, in her mother's sister's voice, that slipped past the part of her that was a Voss and landed in the part of her that was still 8 years old. That night, Isabella did not sleep. The next morning at Lincoln Prep, she did not save the seat beside her in AP Calculus. Ethan noticed within 30 seconds. He did not say anything. He sat 3 rows up, and when she walked past him in the hall between 4th and 5th period, she did not meet his eyes. It continued like that for 4 days. A slow withdrawal, a returned hello that was a little too short, a sudden need to be somewhere else at lunch. Ethan felt it happening the way a man feels a tide going out under his feet. He told himself not to press. He told himself she had a right to be afraid. He told himself a great many careful things, and none of them stopped the small, sick place in his chest from growing. On the 5th day, at the center table of the cafeteria, he made the mistake of saying her name. Isabella. She looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed and far away, and something in them had been wound very tight by a hand that was not her own. "Don't," she said. "Just tell me what I did. You didn't do anything, Cole. That's the point." Her voice rose on the last word, a small crack in the flat surface of it, and the cafeteria began, at the nearest tables, to quiet. She picked up her water bottle. She stood. For one suspended second, she seemed to be fighting something inside herself that was larger than the room. Then she unscrewed the cap and emptied the water across his tray. "You're a charity case, Cole." Her voice was loud enough now for the whole south side of the cafeteria to hear, and it was shaking, and she would not let it shake. "My father pays for you. Don't confuse yourself." She walked out. Ethan stood in the ring of silence with cold water running off his sleeve and did not move for a long time. Isabella made it as far as the 3rd-floor bathroom, the one with the hissing radiator, before she slid down the tile wall and cried into her knees. That evening, in her perfumed room on Astor Street, Victoria closed her door, took out the small black phone, and smiled. She pushed him away, she said. "When we take him, nobody at Voss will lift a finger in time." But Isabella Voss was not her father's daughter by accident. She knew the smell of a lie. 32 miles north of the Astor townhouse, in the village of Lake Forest, where old money slept behind wrought iron gates and hedges trimmed by men who had trimmed them for 30 years, a yellow light was burning in the study of a limestone manor at the end of a private drive. The house was 107 years old. The man sitting behind the mahogany desk in the study had owned it for 31 of those years, which was still less than half his life. A low fire burned in the grate. A cut crystal decanter of single malt stood untouched on the sideboard. The walls were lined floor to ceiling with leather-bound books, most of them first editions, most of them actually read. The man reading tonight was not reading a book. He was reading a printed intelligence summary, pages long, no letterhead, typed in a plain serif font on cream paper that would burn without ash. Leonard Graves was 55. His hair was a thick, brushed-back silver that he had refused to dye for 20 years, because vanity was the one vice he could not afford. His eyes, behind their thin gold-rimmed glasses, were the color of old pewter. He wore a gray cardigan over a pressed Oxford shirt and soft house slippers, and on a bad photograph from the right angle he looked exactly like what he used to be before he became anything else, which was an adjunct professor of international finance at a small liberal arts college in Connecticut. What he had become was called, by the handful of people alive who still spoke the phrase, the architect. The consortium was a word the FBI had tried to attach to him twice, in 2 separate grand juries, in 2 separate decades. Both grand juries had quietly gone away. The consortium, to the extent that it still existed as anything but a ghost in certain accounting firms and certain Caribbean banks, was a financial network, not a crime family. It did not collect debts at knife point. It did not run numbers in a back room. It moved rivers of money across borders that pretended not to have cracks, and it had, at its height, counted among its clients 3 standing senators, 9 federal judges, 1 former cabinet secretary, and 17 mid-level mafia organizations in North America. The Voss Syndicate had been, in the spreadsheet where Leonard kept track of such things, line 41. 17 years ago, a quiet forensic accountant named Samuel Andrew Cole had walked out of a midtown office in Manhattan carrying an encrypted hard drive the size of a paperback book, and every single line of that spreadsheet had gone cold at the same instant. Leonard had told the membership then that Cole was dead and the drive had been destroyed. He had told the membership that because if he had told them anything else, they would have fled the continent in a single week, and what was left of the consortium would have dissolved into the night. He had been looking for the drive every day since. The intercom on the desk chimed softly. "Send him in," Leonard said, without raising his voice. The study door opened. A very large man had to duck slightly to come through it. Dante Kroll was 6 feet and 6 inches tall, Croatian by birth and geography, Swiss by training, American by convenience. He was 41. His head was shaved. His eyes were a pale, almost colorless gray, and they moved across a room the way a metal detector moved across a beach, interested in nothing that was not buried. He wore a dark wool coat over a plain black sweater. He did not sit until Leonard gestured to the leather chair opposite the desk, and even then he sat on the front third of it, as though sitting all the way back would have been an impoliteness to his knees. "Dante," Leonard said, "I have a piece of news that is only 2 hours old, and I would like us to act on it before it becomes 3 hours old." "Are you listening?" "Always, sir." Leonard closed the folder in front of him. "Adrian Voss has pulled a set of sealed files in New York today. The files concerned a man I buried in the minutes of the Consortium Standing Committee 17 years ago. A man I was fairly certain was dead. I was, it now appears, too generous with my certainty. The man's name was Samuel Cole. He had a son. The son is 16 years old. The son was shot 2 weeks ago on the south side of Chicago by the people who were supposed to shoot Adrian Voss's daughter, and in the course of bleeding on her behalf, he made himself, without intending to, the most interesting teenager in the United States." Dante's pale eyes did not flicker. "Adrian Voss now knows who the boy is," Leonard continued. "If he does not yet know what the boy's father took, he will know within a week. Which means I have less than a week to take what I have been looking for since you were in your 20s. You want the boy. I want whatever his father left behind. And I want it without a gunfight on the front lawn of the Voss house on Astor Street, because that particular street is watched by people who like me considerably less than I like them." Leonard leaned forward. "So we will not take the boy. We will take the grandmother. Margaret Cole, 68, Bronzeville, a walk-up on South Calumet. The boy will come to us and he will bring whatever he has, because boys like that always do, for women like that. And Victoria? Victoria will steer the girl away from the Cole boy by the end of the week. She has already begun. She is rather good." Dante nodded once and stood. Leonard watched him duck back out through the study door. 3 miles and one great dark lake away, on the 4th floor of a walk-up on South Calumet, Margaret Cole was pouring boiling water over a tea bag in a chipped porcelain cup, and she did not yet know that this was the last evening in 13 years she would pour her own tea as a free woman. Tuesday, 9:47 in the evening. The apartment on South Calumet smelled like chamomile tea, and the peppermint oil Nana Maggie had been rubbing into the knuckles of her right hand. Outside, the October wind was moving trash down the alley in little dry scrapes. Inside, the new radiator ticked softly under the living room window, and a single lamp was on beside the couch, where Nana Maggie had been knitting until her eyes got tired. Ethan was in the bedroom. The door was half open. He was sitting cross-legged on his mattress with a chemistry textbook on his lap and a spiral notebook beside him, and he was not really reading either of them. He was staring at the same paragraph about molar concentrations that he had stared at for the last 20 minutes, and thinking, helplessly, about the sound of water hitting a cafeteria tray. Across the street, in a parked black Suburban with its engine off, a single Voss man named Hector had been on watch since 8 o'clock. He was drinking cold coffee and listening to a Cubs podcast through one earbud. Saint had gone back to Astor Street 40 minutes earlier for a briefing with Adrian. It was supposed to be a quiet night. Dante Kroll did not come through the front door. He came through the fire escape at the back of the building, and he brought 3 men with him, and they moved in the particular silence of men who had been paid enough, once, to make silence a professional standard. The bedroom window in the unit directly below the Coles had been left unlatched 2 days ago by a tenant who had been offered a month's rent to go visit her sister in Indiana. Dante's people went in there first. 4 seconds later, 2 of them were climbing up the interior staircase on rubber-soled boots. Hector, across the street, was laughing quietly at a joke about the Cubs' bullpen when something small and cold pressed against the back of his neck through the driver's window that he had not rolled down, and a voice with no accent in it at all told him, in English, to put both hands on the steering wheel and not to move for the next 10 minutes. Hector put both hands on the steering wheel. Hector did not move for the next 10 minutes. In the Voss Syndicate, the rule for men caught alone and outnumbered was simple. Be alive to report what happened. He would spend the rest of his life hating this night, and he would be alive to hate it. In the living room, Nana Maggie heard the front door open. She did not hear the lock turn. She looked up from her knitting, and she saw the enormous bald man in the black wool coat fill the doorway, and she saw the 3 men behind him, and she saw Ethan's bedroom door, half open, and the light spilling out of it, and she did the only thing a woman in her chair could still do. She pushed her knitting bag off her lap so it fell against the end table, hard, and knocked the lamp sideways. The sudden change in the light in the hallway was what saved her grandson. In Ethan's bedroom, his head came up at the thud. Dante took one long step into the room, and his pale gray eyes settled on Margaret Cole with something almost like recognition. Her face hardened. "You work for Leonard," she said. It was not a question. Her voice was steady. "I knew. I have been waiting for you for 13 years. Yes, ma'am. She did not scream. She lifted her chin instead, the way her own mother had taught her to lift a chin in a room full of men, and she looked directly at Dante Kroll, and she said, quite clearly, my grandson is a good boy. Leonard will not touch him. You understand me. You tell him that from me. Dante took a small dark glass bottle from an inside pocket of his coat and a folded cloth. He wet the cloth. He crossed to her chair. For a man his size, he knelt almost gently. I am sorry, he said. And he pressed the cloth over her mouth and nose with the careful efficiency of a nurse. In the bedroom, Ethan was already off the mattress and moving toward the hall when he heard the soft, heavy sound of his grandmother going limp in her chair. He came through the doorway and saw the tail of a long black coat disappearing through the front door. He saw the empty chair. He saw the knitting needles on the floor. He saw the lamp still sideways, its shade askew, its light pointed at the ceiling. Nana. He ran. He made it to the landing. The stairwell was empty. The front door of the building was closing 4 floors down with a soft pneumatic hiss. He took the stairs 2 at a time with his hip screaming at him, and when he burst out onto the sidewalk there was no black van, no black coat, no grandmother, nothing but the wind and a receding pair of taillights turning right 3 blocks east and gone. He went back upstairs the way a man climbs back into a nightmare. On the kitchen table, beneath a salt shaker, was a folded piece of white paper. Ethan picked it up with hands that had started, finally, to shake. Cole boy. Bring me what your father left. Pier 31, 6 in the morning. No police, no Voss. Or I will send your grandmother back to you in pieces small enough to fit in an envelope. He did not realize he was destroying the living room until he was already halfway through it. The lamp, the coffee table, the chair he had done his homework in since he was 8 years old. He stood in the wreckage with his chest heaving and blood in his mouth from where he had bitten the inside of his own cheek, and then he remembered. Last Tuesday, Nana Maggie had taken his hand. She had walked him to the corner of the bedroom closet. She had shown him the loose baseboard. She had said, "If anything ever happens to me, baby, you lift that. You do not open what is inside unless you have to. You understand?" He had understood. He went into the bedroom now. He knelt. He pried up the board with fingers that would not hold still. Inside were 2 things. A small black USB drive, 17 years old, scratched across the casing, the kind of drive nobody made anymore, and a long white envelope, yellowed at the edges, addressed in a careful engineer's handwriting. For my future son, Ethan. To be opened only if you have no other choice. He opened it. The first line of the letter inside read, "If you are reading this, they have found you, and that means I am either dead or worse, still running." The USB in Ethan Cole's shaking hand held the ledger, and the invisible boy from Bronzeville had just become the most hunted human being in the United States of America. He did not call an ambulance. He did not call the police. Ethan folded the letter into the inside pocket of his hoodie, closed his fist around the small black USB until the corners dug half moons into his palm, and ran. The October air outside his building was at 37 degrees Fahrenheit and falling, and he had not put on a coat, and he did not feel it. He made it to the bus stop on 43rd Street in 6 minutes, with his hip screaming a little song at him with every step. A Chicago Transit Authority night bus was there, and so was a waiting Uber, the driver of which looked at Ethan, at his blood-flecked sleeve, at his wrecked eyes, and almost drove away. Ethan showed him the cash in his hand, $37.40, the entire balance of his Nana's jar on top of the refrigerator. The driver let him in. "Astor and Goda," Ethan said. "Gold Coast. Fast. 23 minutes. He counted them on the dashboard clock. He counted them past the loop of the river, and the cold smear of the drive and the dark water off his right shoulder, and somewhere around minute 14, his hands began to shake so hard he had to tuck them under his armpits to make them stop. The driver dropped him at the corner. Ethan walked the last half block alone and came to a stop at the black wrought iron gates of the Voss townhouse, and a man in a wool overcoat stepped out of the small stone guardhouse with a hand already resting on whatever was under his jacket. "Kid, walk away. I need to see Adrian Voss. I don't know what you think this is." "My name is Ethan Cole." There was a long, careful pause. The man's eyes flicked up toward a camera mounted above the gatehouse. His hand did not come off the jacket. "Sir," he said, to an earpiece, "kid at the north gate. Says his name is 2 from the second-floor balcony." A voice cut through the cold night air before he could finish. "Open the gate." Ethan looked up. Isabella was leaning over the railing in the same oversized gray hoodie she had worn to the hospital, her hair loose around her face, her breath making small white clouds. Her eyes were not the eyes that had tipped a bottle of water onto his tray 3 days ago. They were the eyes from the diner floor. "Open it, Marco. Now, please." The gate clicked and swung. Ethan pushed through. He made it halfway up the front walk before his knees finally decided they were done, and the cold stone rose up to meet him. Isabella met him first. She had come down the marble staircase in her socks, and she dropped beside him in the foyer with her arms around his shoulders, and she was already crying. "I'm sorry," she said into his hair, in a voice that had nothing careful left in it. "Ethan, I'm sorry about the cafeteria. I didn't mean it. My aunt has been saying things to me and I couldn't. They took my grandmother." She froze. He pulled the USB out of his pocket and held it up between them in his shaking fist. Isabella stared at it. Then she looked past his shoulder, and her back straightened, and her arms tightened around him instead of letting go. Adrian Voss was coming down the staircase. He was not in a suit tonight. He was in a black cashmere sweater and dark trousers, and his jaw was set in a way Ethan had not seen on him in the hospital. Behind him came Saint, already armed, and Ghost, carrying a thin silver laptop, and a fourth man Ethan did not know, 60 years old, olive skin, steel hair, the quiet, weathered eyes of a priest who had stopped believing in anything except other people's confessions. They stopped in a loose arc at the foot of the stairs. For a long, suspended second, Adrian Voss looked at the boy kneeling in his foyer holding up a 17-year-old piece of plastic, and Ethan watched the man understand exactly what he was being handed, and by whom. "Mr. Cole," Adrian said quietly. "Where is your grandmother?" "They took her. Out of the apartment. There was a note. They want this. They want me at Pier 31 at 6 in the morning. Or they," his voice broke, and he made it keep going. "Or they send her back to me in pieces. I don't know what's on it. I don't know what my dad did. I just need her back." He held out the USB. Adrian took it between his thumb and forefinger the way a surgeon takes a scalpel. Ghost. The laptop came open on the low table by the door. Ghost slid the drive in. His fingers moved across the keys in a quiet dance, and 30 seconds passed, and Ghost's color left his face the way a shadow leaves a wall at sundown. "Sir." His voice was barely above a whisper. "This is the ledger. All of it. 2005 through 2009. Every name, every account, every route. Sir." He swallowed. "Your name is on page 47. The room went very still. The older man, the one with the priest's eyes, Silas Moreno, the consigliere Adrian had called the conscience of the syndicate for 20 years, stepped forward. "Adrian." Silas did not lift his voice. He never needed to. "If that drive goes public, we are finished. Not damaged. Finished. 20 years of work, 40 years of relationships, burned in a single week. You know what you have to do. You give it to Graves. You let the boy go somewhere we cannot find him. We grieve him quietly. It is the only choice." Adrian did not answer at once. He looked down at the USB in his fingers. He looked at Ethan, still on his knees on the marble floor. He looked at his daughter, whose hand was knotted white in the sleeve of the boy's hoodie. He spoke one word. "No." Silas exhaled a breath that sounded like he had been holding it for 20 years. "I will not trade the boy who took 2 bullets for my daughter," Adrian said. His voice was low, flat, final. "Not tonight. Not ever. We do this a different way." At 4 o'clock in the morning, while the sky over Lake Michigan was still the color of wet slate, and Ethan Cole slept the thin, jagged sleep of the exhausted in a guest bedroom on the 3rd floor, Adrian Voss convened his war council in the library on the 2nd. Saint was there. Ghost was there. Silas was there, with the expression of a man who had lost an argument he was not finished losing. 3 more men filed in quietly. The oak doors of the library were closed, and the small brass latch was turned, and Isabella was told, with the particular firmness her father used only when he would not be moved, that she was not coming in. She did not argue. Arguing was the wrong weapon for this room. She nodded, kissed her father on the cheek like a good daughter, and went. She did not go back to bed. She could not have slept if someone had drugged her. She walked the long marble hallway of the 2nd floor in socks, past the shut library doors, past the small sitting room where her mother's portrait hung under its own brass lamp, and she was almost to the staircase at the far end when she heard the voice coming from the 2nd sitting room she had not expected anyone to be in at this hour. It was Aunt Victoria's voice, but it was not the voice Aunt Victoria used in this house. Isabella slowed. She stopped. She moved closer along the wall, silent in her socks, and she placed her hand flat against the cool plaster beside the cracked door of the sitting room, and she listened. The boy showed up at 1:22 this morning. He brought it himself. They have the ledger, Leonard, all of it. Adrian has already refused to hand it over. You need a plan B, and you need it before sunrise. Isabella stopped breathing. The line on the other end of the call was loud enough, in the quiet of the hallway, for her to make out a man's voice, dry and patient and older. Then we take the girl. Isabella's hand against the plaster went cold. Pull Isabella out tonight, Leonard Graves said, and use her. Adrian will bring us the drive himself, and the boy as well, to get his daughter back. It was always going to end that way. Let us stop pretending otherwise. I can be out the south kitchen door with her in 8 minutes. Then do it. Inside the sitting room, Victoria Hale ended the call. She slipped the small black phone into the pocket of her cashmere robe. She turned toward the cracked door to close it on her way back upstairs, smoothing her hair with one hand. And she saw her niece standing on the other side of it. For a single suspended second, it was still Aunt Vicky's face. And then, in the slow way a porcelain mask is lowered over features that have been practicing a lie for years, the warmth went out of it. The eyes went flat. The small fond curl at the corner of her mouth sharpened. Isabella was looking at a stranger wearing the skin of the woman who had brushed her hair since she was 8 years old. "Sweetheart," Victoria said, and her voice was still lovely, still a music, still almost her own. "Be a good girl, and come with Aunt Vicky. Don't make me take you." Isabella did not move for one full breath. Then she turned and she ran. "Saint!" she screamed down the hallway. "Saint! Library now!" She heard the fabric of her aunt's robe move behind her, fast, and a hand that had always been gentle closed around her upper arm with a grip that was not gentle at all. Isabella twisted. She had learned how to twist, a long time ago, from a 6'4" Irishman who had wanted her to be able to survive exactly this moment. She drove her elbow back hard into her aunt's sternum and broke the grip and kept running. Victoria reached into the inside pocket of her robe and came out with a small, matte black Glock. The library doors came open with a bang. Saint was already moving. For a man his size, he moved as though gravity were merely a suggestion. He crossed 20 feet of marble in under 2 seconds, and Victoria, lifting the Glock, did not even quite finish the motion, before his right hand closed on her wrist and his left forearm caught her across the collarbone. The gun went off once into the plaster ceiling. Dust snowed down in slow, soft spirals. Saint took her to the floor on her stomach with a knee in the small of her back and disarmed her in one short, bored motion. The fight had lasted, all told, 15 seconds. Isabella was standing against the opposite wall with both hands pressed to her mouth. Victoria, her cheek against the cold marble, began to laugh. It was a small, private, almost delighted laugh, and it was the most horrifying sound Isabella had ever heard from a member of her own family. Kara. Victoria's eyes found hers, and there was something loose and bright in them, something that had been waiting to come out for years. "Do you know why your mother died?" "Don't." "Because I wanted her to. Elena was always the favored one. She got the beauty. She got Adrian. She got you. And when I finally decided I was done waiting for what was mine, I sent one phone call. One." She smiled through the blood on her lip. "I helped, Isabella. Do you hear me? I helped." Isabella's knees went. She slid down the wall to the marble floor, and she could not breathe, and she could not see, and she did not know she was crying until Saint, without releasing Victoria's wrists, looked past his own shoulder and said in a voice as close to tender as his voice ever got, "Boss, you need to come out here." The library doors opened again. Adrian Voss stepped into the hallway. His face had gone to stone. Ethan, 2 floors up, would remember later that he had not heard the man make any sound at all as he crossed the marble. Adrian took in Victoria on the floor, and the Glock in Saint's hand, and his daughter folded against the wall. He walked past Victoria without looking at her, because if he had looked at her, he would have killed her in the hallway with his bare hands, and then he would have had nothing left to give his daughter. He went to Isabella instead. He knelt. He gathered her against his chest. His face stayed stone. His hands, where they cradled the back of his daughter's head, shook. "Declan." His voice came out low and level. "Take my daughter inside. And then get ready. Tonight, we are going to go get the boy's grandmother back." They moved the council into the innermost sitting room on the ground floor, the one with no windows, at 20 minutes to 5 in the morning. It was a small, warm room, paneled in dark walnut, with 2 leather armchairs and a long, low couch, and a single fireplace that Adrian Voss had laid himself earlier in the night, because laying a fire was one of the few quiet things he still knew how to do with his hands. Isabella was on the couch, wrapped in a wool throw, a cup of tea untouched on the table in front of her. Her eyes were red. Her fingers, where they gripped Ethan's, had stopped shaking only in the last 5 minutes. Ethan sat beside her, the yellowed envelope flat across his lap, and he was not yet brave enough to look at it. Adrian stood at the fireplace. Saint was at the door. Ghost was at a desk in the corner with a laptop open and a second, smaller drive connected to the first. Silas was in one of the armchairs with his elbows on his knees and his hands folded, watching Ethan in a way that was not unkind. "Son," Adrian said. Ethan's head came up at the word. "Before we plan for the pier, we need to know what your father left you. Read the letter. Read it aloud if you can. If you cannot, read it to yourself. Take your time. We are not moving a single man until you do." Ethan nodded. He opened the envelope. The paper inside was folded 3 times, crisp at the edges, smelling faintly of old pine and a hint of the cedar chest it had lived in for too many years. Samuel Cole's handwriting was careful and slightly slanted, the penmanship of a man who had made his living getting numbers to line up. Ethan read. For a long time, the only sound in the room was the small, quiet snap of the fire. The letter did not begin with affection. It began with facts, because Samuel had been, above all else, a man who believed facts were a kind of love. Samuel Cole had been the chief forensic accountant for an organization that ran under many names and was known to its members as the Consortium. He had been recruited at 31, paid better than any legitimate job could have paid him, and for 4 years he had built the hidden architecture of their money across 17 countries. He had not known at first what they were. He had told himself many things, the letter said, and none of those things had lasted. In the autumn of 2008, his wife, Rachel, Ethan's mother, had found a spreadsheet he had left open on the kitchen table. She had asked him 3 questions. He had answered the first 2. The third, he had lied. 3 weeks later, Rachel had been killed. The death certificate said heart failure. The letter said, in a sentence so plain that Ethan had to read it twice, they had a doctor. He made it look like her heart stopped on its own. The man who arranged it was named Leonard Graves. He smiled at me at her funeral. He told me how sorry he was. The pen of Ethan's father had pressed a little harder on the page after that sentence. Samuel had taken the ledger 3 months later. He had not gone to the FBI, because the FBI had on its payroll men who were also on the list. He had not gone to any newspaper, because 3 of the owners were on the list as well. He had done the only thing left. He had hidden the drive. He had taken his 3-year-old son to his mother in Chicago, and told her to run if anything ever came to the door, and he had vanished. The last paragraph of the letter was shorter than the rest. If you are reading this, Ethan, they have found you, and that means I am either dead or I am still running, which is almost worse, because it means I could not come home to you. If I am alive, I am trying to break the thing I helped build, from inside, one piece at a time. If I am not, then I am sorry I did not come back in time to see the man you became. You were the only light I ever made in this world. Everything else I did was numbers. Ethan finished reading. He held the page on his knees for a long moment, and then, silently and without warning, the thing he had not allowed himself to do in more years than he could count broke open in his chest. He cried. Isabella moved without speaking. She set down her teacup and folded her arms around him and put her forehead against his temple and held on. He let her. He had never let anyone do that in his life. It turned out he had been starving. Adrian had crossed to the window at some point during the reading, though there was no view behind the drawn curtain. His back was to the room. When Ethan's breathing finally steadied, the older man turned around, and his green eyes, the same unsettling green Ethan had last seen above him on a diner floor, were shining with something Ethan had not thought Adrian Voss permitted himself. Your father, Adrian said, was a braver man than most of the men I have ever met, including me. Ethan wiped his face with the heel of his hand and nodded. Adrian walked over and sat on the edge of the coffee table, low, so his eyes were level with the boy's. He did not touch him. He gave him the respect of distance. Ethan, listen. In 3 hours I am going to get your grandmother back. I promise you that. But when this is over, that drive is not going to Graves, and it is not going to the FBI. The FBI has rot in it. I know a woman, a federal agent named Diana Kessler, who has been waiting 20 years for exactly this ledger. She does not take money. She does not make deals. If I put the ledger in her hands, She will tear down every man on that list, including several men I have called friends. She will tear down part of me too. Do you understand what I am telling you? Yes, sir. I need your permission, son, because that drive belongs to you. Your father paid for it. Ethan looked at Isabella. She nodded, very small, once. Ethan looked back at Adrian. Give it to her, he said. Adrian Voss, sitting on a coffee table in his own house at 4:53 in the morning, had just agreed to burn part of his own empire to the ground to save one old woman and one teenage boy to whom he owed, by any blood accounting, nothing at all. Pier 31 jutted out into Lake Michigan like a broken finger. The fog had come down off the water at 3 in the morning and had refused, at 5:45, to lift. Visibility was under 40 feet. The temperature was 36 degrees Fahrenheit and falling. The only lights were 2 sodium lamps at the landward end, and both of them had been quietly cut by a Voss technician at 5:32. Ethan walked the length of the pier alone. That had been the first rule Adrian had given him, in the sitting room at 5 o'clock. You will be seen walking alone. You will be seen with the drive in your hand. You will be seen with nothing else. Anything more than that, and Graves will kill your grandmother before we can reach him. What Graves could not see were the 8 men already in position across the length of the pier. 2 on the roof of the harbor master's shed, 2 flat in the beds of fishing skiffs moored at the near slip. 4, including Saint, crouched behind a row of stacked shipping containers at the base of the pier, their thermal optics reading the fog through a soft green. Adrian himself stood in the shadow beneath the elevated walkway on the west side, because Adrian Voss did not send men into places he was not willing to walk into. Ghost was in a van 2 blocks up, running a spotter laptop on 4 infrared feeds, and behind Ghost's van, crouched in the back seat of a black Suburban she had no permission to be in, Isabella Voss sat with her fingers white on the door handle, and her father's name stuck in her throat. Ethan reached the end of the pier. Out of the fog, like a shape stepping through a curtain, Leonard Graves appeared. He was dressed for the weather, a long charcoal wool coat buttoned to the throat, a gray scarf, leather gloves. He looked, in the weak pre-dawn, exactly like what he had tried for 30 years to look like, a well-read man enjoying an early walk. Behind him, fanning into a loose arc, came 12 armed men in tactical coats. Between 2 of them, her wrists bound in front of her, a piece of duct tape across her mouth, white hair disheveled in the wet air, walked Nana Maggie. At the back of the arc stood Dante Kroll, who had not bothered with a coat, who watched Ethan arrive across the boards of the pier with the polite interest of a man studying a clock. Mr. Cole. Leonard's voice carried easily on the still damp air. You look very much like your father. That is unfortunate for you. Ethan held up the small, scratched USB between his thumb and forefinger. Let her go. Then you take it. Leonard smiled almost fondly, the way a professor smiles at a student who has just proposed a naive solution in a seminar. He nodded. The 2 men holding Nana Maggie released her arms. She swayed but did not fall. Her eyes found her grandson across the pier and stayed there. Ethan crouched and set the drive down on the wet boards. He stood up. He stepped back 3 paces. Leonard crossed the distance and bent to pick it up. His gloved fingers had just closed on the plastic when the world on Pier 31 changed. 4 halogen work lamps hit from 4 angles at once, blooming the fog into sudden white. Saint's voice came from everywhere and nowhere, amplified through a bullhorn that had not been there a second before. Put down your weapons. This is Voss territory. The pier exploded. The first man Adrian Voss killed that morning was the one directly to Leonard's left, a thin man in a black watch cap who was already raising a rifle toward Ethan. Adrian stepped out of the shadow beneath the walkway with a suppressed pistol already extended, and he put 2 rounds through the man's chest before the rifle finished coming up. He moved left along the pier's edge and put another 2 rounds through a second man whose trigger discipline had not survived the halogen lights. Saint was already among the arc, at speed, with a suppressed carbine, and the world was suddenly full of the flat, polite coughs of suppressed gunfire and the short screams of men who had brought heavier weapons to a fight designed against them. Dante Kroll did not shoot. Dante Kroll picked up a 20-inch steel pipe from the deck beside a mooring bollard and waded through the fog towards Saint, and for 45 seconds, 2 very large men, who had trained in very different expensive places, traded movements that were too fast for the untrained eye. Saint was better. Dante was faster. Saint took a long, shallow slice along his left forearm that opened his coat sleeve and bloomed red. Saint, in the next motion, drove an elbow into Dante's throat, stepped behind him, and put him face down on the wet boards with his own pipe across the back of his knees. Leonard Graves was already running. He had the drive in his gloved fist, and he ran east along the pier toward the open end where the water waited, and a small fast boat, no one had yet noticed, was beginning its approach in the fog. For a man of 55, he moved with a terrible economy. Ethan ran after him. He did not hear Adrian shout at him to stop. He heard only the sound of his own lungs and the hard, hollow percussion of his shoes on the boards. At the very tip of Pier 31, Leonard Graves turned with a small dark pistol already raised, and Ethan Cole ran directly into the line of it and did not stop. "Your father took 20 years from me," Leonard said. "He was not even breathing hard. I will take them back from you." His finger began to tighten on the trigger. A shape stepped out of the fog behind him and brought a 2-foot length of galvanized pipe down across the back of his head with both hands. Leonard Graves dropped like a cut string. Isabella Voss stood above him in her brother's borrowed gray hoodie with the pipe still raised, her green eyes wide and hot, her chest heaving. The drive bounced out of Leonard's glove and skidded across the boards and went still between Ethan's shoes. He picked it up. Ghost had always been careful about one particular detail. The drive Leonard Graves had been carrying for the last 6 minutes was a copy with nothing on it but a single text file that said, in 4 languages, "You lost." The real drive had never left the inside pocket of Adrian's coat. At the landward end of the pier, Saint was cutting the tape off Nana Maggie's mouth with a folding knife, gentle as a nurse. She did not cry. She looked up the length of the pier to where her grandson was standing, with a girl in an oversized hoodie and blood on the pipe at her feet. "Thank you, Nana," Maggie said quietly, to both of them, "for keeping my boy alive. Both of my children." 3 weeks after the fog lifted off Pier 31, Adrian Voss walked into a quiet corner booth in a diner he had never been to before, in Evanston, and slid a small, scratched piece of black plastic across the formica to a woman who had been waiting 20 years for it. Special Agent Diana Kessler of the Federal Bureau of Investigation was 51 years old, unmarried, and famously unbribable. She ran a task force out of the Dirksen Federal Building that had no name on the directory and a budget nobody in Washington quite liked to look at. She had been offered, over the course of her career, 2 country houses, 1 boat, 3 promotions in exchange for looking the other way, and once, a briefcase of uncut diamonds in a hotel bar in Miami. She had turned all of them down. She wore her hair in a short practical cut and drank her coffee black. She looked at the drive between them for a long moment without touching it. "Everything?" she said. "Everything," Adrian said. 2005 through 2009. Names, routes, accounts, signatures, including mine. Why? Adrian did not answer for a long time. He stirred his coffee, which he was not going to drink, and watched a small green light blink on a smoke alarm above the booth. "Because a 16-year-old boy took 2 bullets for my daughter," he said at last, "and his father paid for this drive with his life, and I have been too tired for too long to keep pretending I didn't know the difference between winning and being right." Diana Kessler picked up the drive. She slid it into the inside pocket of her blazer. "You understand what happens now?" "I do. You will lose people you thought were your brothers. I know." She nodded, once. She left a $5 bill on the table for her coffee, which she had also not drunk. She walked out into the cold Chicago afternoon. 6 months later, what the papers would eventually call Operation Midnight unfolded over 72 hours across 4 time zones. 47 men were arrested in simultaneous raids in Chicago, Boston, New York, Miami, Phoenix, Montreal, and Grand Cayman. 2 federal judges resigned before their indictments were unsealed. A sitting state senator in New Jersey was photographed on his front lawn in a bathrobe, with his hands on his head. Leonard Graves was arrested in a medical bed on the 11th floor of Northwestern Memorial, where he had been recovering from the skull fracture a 16-year-old girl had given him with a length of galvanized pipe. He was charged with 23 federal counts. The consensus among the prosecutors was that he would not see the outside of a federal prison again. From his cell, 2 weeks before his arraignment, he wrote a single short letter, by hand, in the same careful serif he had written memos in for 30 years. It was delivered to the Astor Street address by courier and opened, in the small, innermost sitting room, by Adrian Voss. "You chose the boy over the empire. You are a romantic fool, Adrian. I respect it." Adrian read it once. He fed it into the fire. He poured himself a single short glass of bourbon and drank it, and for the first time in a very long time he did not feel, at the bottom of the glass, that he owed the world anything further. Victoria Hale did not stand trial in any federal court. Victoria Hale was handed, by Saint himself on the night of Pier 31, into the particular internal justice of the Voss Syndicate. What happened to her after that door closed, Adrian would never tell his daughter, and Isabella would eventually stop asking. The only thing he said, 2 mornings after Pier 31, sitting on the edge of her bed in the dawn light, was, "You will not see your aunt again. You do not need to be afraid of her. Ever." Isabella had nodded, and cried quietly into his shoulder for a while, and had not asked anything else. The cost on Adrian's side of the ledger came due in the months that followed Operation Midnight. 60% of the syndicate's territory went to other families, or dissolved into the air. 40% of the revenue went with it. Silas Moreno, the consigliere who had counseled him for 20 years to trade the boy and the drive, took his blessing and a smaller branch of the organization and moved quietly to Arizona. Several men who had called Adrian brother for a decade stopped calling. On a Thursday in late November, Saint came into Adrian's office on the top floor of the tower on Michigan Avenue with a single sheet of paper and laid it on the desk. "We're smaller, boss." Saint's gray eyes flicked over the numbers. "We're weaker. We are also, by a considerable margin, cleaner than we have been in my time with you." Adrian looked down at the sheet. He looked out the window at the city, which in the afternoon sun was gold along every west-facing pane. He smiled. It was, Saint noticed without commenting, the first smile of his that had reached his eyes since Elena had died. "That is a very good trade, Declan." Across town, in a small frame house on a quiet, tree-lined street in Evanston that Adrian had bought outright and put in Margaret Cole's name, Nana Maggie was cutting chrysanthemums from the small front garden a landscaper she had not hired had, at Adrian's quiet direction, installed the week she moved in. A fat orange cat Adrian had not told her was coming, watched her from the porch. In the evenings, she and Ethan sat at the kitchen table, and she told him, finally, the stories she had been saving for 16 years, about his father at 12, at 20, at 30, at the last day she had seen him alive. Ethan Cole was no longer the invisible boy. Isabella Voss was no longer the Mafia princess. Neither of them yet knew who they were going to be. They had, for the first time in both their lives, been given the time to find out. 2 months after the last federal indictment was unsealed, on the first Saturday of March, Chicago was at last beginning to thaw. At 4:40 in the afternoon, the bell above the door of Murphy's Corner Diner jingled, and a boy in a clean wool coat held the door open for a girl in an oversized gray hoodie that clearly belonged to him. They slid into the corner booth by the emergency exit. The front window had been replaced, but in the middle of the refinished tabletop, set under a thin square of clear resin, Joe had kept one thing. A single bullet hole, framed like a small dark star, with a brass plaque beside it that read, "For the 2 kids who remembered how to be brave." Joe brought 2 tall milkshakes without being asked. "On the house. For my heroes." Isabella smiled at him, and the smile went all the way to her eyes, which was new. She did not look much like the girl who had transferred into Lincoln Prep in October. Her hair was loose, her jeans were from a mall, the silver pen had gone into a drawer in her father's desk, and she had not asked for it back. At the small alternative school where she and Ethan finished out their junior year, her transcript said Bella Cole, a name she had chosen herself. They had both received their early admission letters that week. "Full ride," Ethan said. "University of Illinois at Chicago. Chemical engineering. My grandmother cried for 20 minutes. Law school track. Same school. I want to be the kind of lawyer who tears down networks like the consortium, not the kind who keeps them standing." The bell jingled again. Adrian Voss walked in wearing, for the first time in Ethan's memory, a black wool sweater instead of a suit. He slid into the booth beside his daughter, and for 20 whole minutes, talked about the weather and a small cottage near a lake in Wisconsin, as though he were a man whose life consisted of those things. When he stood to leave, he laid one hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Thank you, son," he said quietly, "for saving my daughter. Twice, once with your body, once by teaching her that loving somebody is not a weakness." He kissed Isabella on the top of her head and walked out to the slate-gray Mercedes. The boy and the girl sat back in their booth alone. Isabella leaned her head against his shoulder. He took her hand. "Do you ever regret it, that day, choosing me?" He laughed, a small, quiet sound. "I would do it again, every day. I just hope I don't have to." Outside, a black Suburban rolled past at a quiet, watchful pace. Neither of them flinched. They had learned the difference between a shadow and a shelter. For the first time in both their lives, they were simply, entirely, themselves. Dear friends, here is what our story wants to leave in your hands tonight. Some people are born in the light, some are pushed into the dark, and some, the luckiest ones, learn how to walk between the two without losing themselves to either. Ethan Cole chose courage in a heartbeat, and Isabella Voss chose love against every rule her family had ever given her, and between them they did what almost no one does. They saved each other. The deepest lesson is this: kindness is not weakness. Invisibility is not safety. And the person you rush toward, without thinking, when the world is breaking apart, is often the person who will one day show you who you really are. If this story moved something in you, please tap the like button, share this video with someone you love, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss a new story. And we would love to hear from you. In the comments below, tell us, have you ever had a moment when a stranger stepped into your story and changed everything? Which part of tonight's story stayed with you the most? Your comments are read with care. From our whole team, we wish you a peaceful heart, steady health, and days filled with small kindnesses and quiet courage. Take care of the people who would run 14 feet for you. Be that person for someone else. Thank you for spending this time with us. Goodbye for now, and we will see you in the next story.